Every Breedlove guitar has countless custom options that can be applied to it, including your choice of binding on some of the fancier instruments. Here we have koa binding, bloodwood binding, walnut binding. And some of these are for some models that we make standard. Our Northwest model, one of my favorites, has walnut binding on myrtlewood back and sides and a maple neck. And Kim Breedlove's Totem Animals inlay. Some of the stock or some of the instruments that we build on a consistent basis, we've had the patterns for the inlay actually engineered so that it's cut by a CNC machine, whereas some of the more one-off or intricate or artistic patterns are still hand-cut one at a time with a jeweler saw and files and inlaid into the guitars at a later point in the process. But for example, after this fingerboard has been bound with its walnut binding and its dots inlaid, it's then going to be glued onto the neck shaft. After the fingerboard's glued on, the neck shaft looks something like this. And it's close, you can see it's close, it's maybe 80–90% of the shape of a finished Breedlove guitar neck, but there's still a lot of rough edges and a lot of stuff that just isn't going to feel right without a lot of hand shaping. And that's where Scott comes in. You can see he's working this neck over here by hand. He's actually getting through the finishing stages of the hand shaping process and just refining the heel shape with some sandpaper before finally sanding it with 120, 180, and 220 grit sandpaper prior to finishing. Because every single neck that we build is made to order and matches in serial number to the body, it's kind of like an arranged marriage where the bride and groom, they know they're going to be destined for one another, but they don't really get to see each other until later in the process. So what Scott's doing is he's refining the shape that we got off the CNC machine after we've glued the fingerboard on using a series of rasps and then some sandpaper. Right now he's got the Japanese saw rasp and he's knocking off the really rough edges here on the binding and beginning the initial blend of the barrel up onto the fingerboard. He's going to refine that shape and those marks with the cabinet maker's rasp here, and finally progress to some really fine cutting files to do the final blending of the binding to the barrel of the neck before starting in with the sandpaper with 120 grit, 180, and 220 grit sandpaper in preparation for final finishing. I'm going to show you guys how we inlay the Breedlove Pearl, Mother of Pearl B logo into the headstock of a masterclass instrument here. A lot of people wonder about that. On these instruments, we've actually had the cavity for the logo routed out by the CNC machine. This can also be done by hand with a small router, but we also have the matching B. Years ago, when we were very small, when we were first starting out, Larry Breedlove used to cut out each and every one of these Bs with a jeweler's saw at the picnic table during lunch. That was kind of his ritual. And nowadays, as demand for our product has grown, we have again turned to CNC technology to cut out the Pearl logo for us. So the advantage of this is that we have a very nicely matching cavity and logo inlay, and it's so well matched, in fact, that it barely fits in there. We need a little bit of a piece of pressured, a little bit of pressure from our ebony block to push it flush. Now the real trick here is that to fill any of the gaps around the logo, we're going to take a little bit of Sharpie marker, although Kim Breedlove prefers marks a lot. That's a matter of personal preference, I think. We're just going to go around the whole logo with a little bit of that black marker, and then we're going to put some water-thin super glue in there. And the capillary action is going to draw the super glue into the space around the logo. As soon as this dries, that logo is going to be permanently affixed in place. We can sand back what's proud, all the super glue, and what the result is going to be this logo that's seamlessly laid flush into the surface of the peghead veneer. After the sides have been bent to shape and the cutaway has come out of the male-female mold, it's been cooked in the heat blanket to the shape of our guitar, we're going to take the sides and assemble what we call the rim in this blocking mold. The head block and tail block are the two main structural elements that we're going to be gluing in place at this time period. The head block really kind of creates the structural support that the neck needs to resist all the torsional load of the strings. It's also going to be where we're going to put the bolts. The tail block is going to allow you to rest your guitar on the floor without the sides cracking, and it's also where we're going to put the end block. So after fitting and trimming the sides to proper length, we're going to glue in the blocks with an extensive number of clamps, let it dry for about an hour before we take it over to the beginning of what's called the body building process. That's where we're really going to take all these parts that we've been assembling, the top and the back and the rim assembly, and we're going to turn them into an actual box that's going to start really looking like a guitar. This is the start of the body building process. We've got our rim assembly here, and this is a concert asymmetric, a CM model of stunning Brazilian rosewood. We're actually building for our Japanese distributor. They're going to show this at a Japanese guitar festival called the Gaki Fair. But the first thing that we have to do to build a body out of our rim assembly is we need to glue in what's called the lining. This is called a kerf lining. The kerf is the space that we took out of the lining to make it flexible enough to conform to the shape of the guitar. And we build our linings out of Spanish cedar, very lightweight, totally neutral wood that just smells great. It's that smell, if you open a brand new Breedlove case up, it's that new guitar smell. It comes from that cedar lining. And we're going to use what are called kerfing clamps. They're really kind of like glorified clothespins to glue the lining in place. And this is going to provide the surface area that we need to attach the top and back. Without that, there wouldn't be enough gluing surface area to hold the whole guitar together. So the lining is going to allow us to create enough surface for that top and back to get a good, nice, tight bond. Again, we've got a lifetime warranty we've got to look after, so that's where this comes in. After we get all the kerfing glued in, we're going to put the guitar into an assembly mold. That mold, this one here, for example, for an orchestra model guitar, will sort of spread the guitar out and give us the structural support we need during the construction process and ensure that the guitar has the similar shape to the last one we built. Hopefully they all come out the same shape, and this mold is going to help ensure that. After the rim assembly has had its kerf lining and the side braces installed, Jake's getting ready to put the guitar rim in the construction mold. That beautiful striped ebony is going into this big plywood mold. It's going to be closed with this over center latch. Next, he's going to make sure it's the right height off of his workboard and fire in a couple of screws that are going to help spread the head block and tail block out in the mold. The screws that he's firing into the mold are going to stretch out the head block and tail block of the rim and make sure that the guitar is going to build out with its geometry true and its alignment on center. Pulling the guitar out with screws is a trick we learned from our friend Bren Ferguson at Gibson Guitars, who was kind enough to let us in on a few of their secrets years ago. After he gets the screws fired in to pull the guitar out into the mold, he's going to spread out the waist using a series of spreader bars and some cawls to support the sides during the construction process. By spreading the guitar out into this mold, this construction mold, we're going to ensure that every guitar that comes out of the process is going to be shaped almost exactly like the one before it and the next one to come, consistently, in other words, so that what you see is what you get with Breedlove guitar shapes. Jake's about to profile our rim assembly here at our bowl sanders. These are modified potter's wheels, actually, that we've attached to the face of a 25-foot radius aluminum bowl. The radius is so subtle, it's hard to see unless you bend down to an oblique angle. He's using the potter's wheels to sand the 25-foot radius of the top onto the rim assembly. He's checking right now to see that the sanding is progressing evenly from side to side on the rim assembly by looking at where the sandpaper is taking away from the pencil lines that he's marked out. As soon as Jake gets the rim completely sanded out, he's going to take some critical measurements and make sure that everything's progressing evenly during the sand out. This sand out portion takes a lot of skill to keep everything very even. After our rim assembly has come off of our radius sanders in the construction mold, the first thing we're going to do is route in with mortise for the Henderson plate. This plywood birch ply plate helps control the geometry of the guitar, make for a nice strong transition from the neck to the body for our fingerboard extension. Jake's routing that in. The next thing we're going to do is cut mortises, slots for all of our braces, essentially to meet the rim, so everything's going to meet real tight. Here Jake's using the small hand router to cut through the kerf lining and create the mortises or the notches that we're going to use for the kerfing, or for the braces to terminate inside of the kerfing. We're doing this for strength, and it's a step that takes a little extra time, but is really what you want in a high-class, high-quality instrument. After he gets all the mortises cut, we're going to actually check the fit of the top to the rim and make sure that everything's lining up just right and that there's no gaps or anything that's not meeting perfectly before we take the guitar over to our giant veneer press and glue it up in the veneer press. After laying out all the locations for the mortises and the lengths of the kerfing, Jake's actually cutting the braces back just a little bit past where it's going to terminate in the kerf lining. This is to prevent the expansion or contraction of the guitar through seasonal movement. Say for example in the winter when it gets really dry in your house because you've got the heater on, prevents the braces from pushing the binding off of the instrument, but it also gives us the strength of having the braces terminate inside the kerf lining. This is all done by hand with the saw and the chisel. Once again, there's just a lot of hand work that goes into building these guitars. Jake's done fitting the top and back onto this rim assembly, and he's just about ready to put this one in the press. And so he's spreading some glue all the way around the kerf lining in preparation for the actual veneering process, the press we're going to use. Throughout our entire process, we've got matching radii, the 25 foot for the top and 16 foot for the back. We've got radius platens in our press that are also going to help push the top and back into place, forming a nice smooth even arch on the top and back of the instrument.